I'm Congresswoman Karen Bass, and we always look forward to doing these policy breakfasts, and we try to do them on the topics that are pertinent to the continent. And I will tell you, when we started doing these Africa policy breakfasts a few years ago, our sole focus was really about AGOA and getting AGOA renewed. And that was our focus because we were very concerned about U.S.-Africa relations and really wanting to turn the tide and how the U.S. public, the U.S. government looked at the continent of Africa and really focusing on trade and development and away from foreign aid, not to say that we don't want to have foreign aid there, but consistent with Africa's slogan, which is trade, not aid. And so that had been our focus for the first couple of years. I'm happy to say, and you know, that we've been celebrating now for many months that AGOA was renewed, and it was renewed for 10 years, but you know, very consistent with still the same theme of trade, not aid, and promoting trade and economic development between our countries. A key issue is security. And so there has been talk of Boko Haram on the Hill every single Wednesday. We're going to be joined shortly by Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, and she has absolutely made it her campaign that every Wednesday we wear red and we remember the girls, the Chibok girls that were kidnapped, and fighting for their return and raising people's levels of consciousness about Boko Haram. But clearly Boko Haram now has become a regional issue, and you can't talk about economic development, you can't talk about the implementation of AGOA in countries without security, and countries that are not stable are being destabilized because of Boko Haram. And so that is the reason for the topic today, and to look at it not just from the perspective of one country, but the regional impact. You should know that with Africa Policy Breakfasts, we always invite representatives from embassies, and the representative from Nigeria has not appointed an ambassador just yet. And so we have invited representatives from the other embassies in the region, and so hopefully we will be hearing from them before the morning proceeds as well. We start this morning's program with remarks from a woman whose job it is to help develop and implement strategic policy aimed at strengthening U.S. bilateral relations with the nations of Africa. Assistant Secretary Linda Thomas Greenfield brings to her position a spectrum of expertise informed by her tenure as Director General of the Foreign Service, Ambassador to Liberia, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. And I think that all of us have known the Assistant Secretary for many years, and I think has it been 2 years now since? 2.5 now. Two and a half. She's not counting because those 2.5 feel more like 10, but we are very happy that we have her today, and so I want to ask the audience to join me in welcoming our Assistant Secretary, Linda Thomas Greenfield.
Wow. Didn't see all those people come in behind me. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Representative Bass, for that kind introduction. I'm not going to go through protocols. I see all of my ambassadors here in the room, and they know that we're all working together on Africa policy. So I will just say all protocols observed, and just again say how pleased I am to have the opportunity to speak with all of you today. You really are the friends of Africa. You are the supporters of my efforts and all of our efforts to find a solution to many of the intractable problems we see on the continent of Africa. But more importantly, you are the cheerleaders for Africa's success. So being in the room with all of you really gives me a lot of energy and a lot of encouragement as we seek to find solutions to things like Boko Haram. So today I will discuss the impact of Boko Haram on the region. I will talk a bit about the U.S. strategy to counter Boko Haram and additional steps that must be taken by all of us to help Nigeria and the region win this war. Boko Haram's savagery, murder, rape, kidnapping, enslavement, extortion, destruction seemingly has no bounds or limits. Boko Haram's members use children in attacks. They bomb places of worship, both Muslim and Christian, and they bomb busy commercial centers and they raid local communities. They're murderers. They're pure and simple murderers. Boko Haram is having a devastating impact in Nigeria and the region. Just last week, Boko Haram attacked the Nigerian village of Dolori and killed more than 65 people. Hear me, people, 65 people. There were reports of terrorists firebombing huts, resulting in children being burned alive. Yet sadly, this is not unique. Every week over the last few months, we hear of attacks by Boko Haram in the region that kills dozens of people. What's more, there are scores of violent raids that disrupt communities on a daily basis that we don't even hear about in the news. So I want to take a moment to extend our deepest condolences of the U.S. government, but of all of us here in the room, to the families and the loved ones of the victims of all of those brutal attacks. I feel each one of those every day. I feel them in my heart, and I feel them in my soul, because I know when these children, these communities are being attacked, behind those numbers are real people, real mothers, real children, real fathers, real people who are suffering from Boko Haram. Boko Haram started in Nigeria, but its impact has spread throughout the region. They also perpetrate their heinous crimes against the people of Cameroon, Niger, and Chad. There, as in Nigeria, civilians live in fear of the terror that Boko Haram has inflicted on their communities. The conflict has created a major humanitarian crisis in the Lake Chad Basin, with some 2.4 million internally displaced people in the region and more than 180,000 Nigerians living as refugees in neighboring countries. Boko Haram's connections to ISIL are tenuous but worrisome and real. Boko Haram leaders declared their allegiance to ISIL. We will need to work together with all states in the region to prevent these ties from getting stronger and break the ties that do not yet exist. This is a global fight. It is not just a Nigerian fight. Defeating Boko Haram requires fighting this group at all levels, on all levels, and that's what we're doing. However, the fight cannot be just won on the battlefield. Our Counter Boko Haram strategy is an integrated interagency effort to help Nigeria and its neighbors in their fight to degrade and ultimately to defeat Boko Haram. This strategy has several focuses, including enhancing the efforts of all of the affected countries to fight Boko Haram, weakening Boko Haram's capacity, financing, and cohesion, enhancing national, state, and local efforts to engage with civilians affected by Boko Haram, countering and preventing violent extremism, removing underlying drivers of insecurity, and addressing the humanitarian needs of civilians affected by Boko Haram. On the battlefield, the situation remains challenging and attacks continue. But Boko Haram is being pushed back by the combined efforts and improved coordination among the Lake Chad Basin countries. As Boko Haram loses territory, however, they have turned increasingly to vicious asymmetric attacks, including the use of children as purveyors of deadly bombs. A key part of our strategy is providing support to the multinational joint task force, which includes soldiers from Cameroon, Chad, Niger, Nigeria, and Benin. We're providing advisors, intelligence, training, logistical support, and equipment. Since President Buhari visited Washington in July last year, we have engaged his military leadership on a range of new and continued security assistance. We expect to inaugurate the first round of U.S. training for an infantry battalion later this month. We've stepped up information sharing efforts. We're jointly evaluating new efforts to counter improvised explosive devices, developing better tools to assess harm to civilians, and assess the potential for U.S. advisory assistance. We've sent 90 U.S. Armed Forces personnel to Cameroon, and we're anticipating sending a total of 300. These soldiers are supporting the governments of Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria by providing airborne intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations that help our African partners degrade and defeat Boko Haram. But the fight against Boko Haram goes way beyond the battlefield, and the security assistance we are providing our partners cannot fill the gap. Equipment and training are only useful when employed by professional forces that respect human rights and earn the respect of the population. Our bilateral security discussions will continue to be paired with discussions regarding human rights. Nigeria and Lake Chad Basin countries must address the drivers of extremism that gave rise to Boko Haram. These drivers include weak, ineffective governance, corruption, lack of education, and lack of economic opportunities and jobs for the burgeoning young populations. If youth in the region are not offered opportunities to contribute to their countries, they become susceptible to terrorism. Countries in the region must take individual and collective steps to back up their military successes with police and civil administration to maintain security, restore stability, provide much-needed basic services, establish rule of law and effective governance, and promote the economic development and job creation needs to break the cycle of violence. The United States, primarily through the tireless efforts of our colleagues of USAID, supports Nigeria in its development efforts and continue to help address the existing emergency needs. The USAID activities in Nigeria and other parts of the region promote education by improving the quality of teaching and learning and increasing equitable access to education, integrating peace building and safety in school communities. And across the region, in 2015 and 2016, the United States is providing more than $195 million in humanitarian assistance for Boko Haram's affected population, including internally displaced persons and refugees. Among other things, this aid includes $20 million in crisis education response that has already established nearly 300 informal learning centers for children of displaced families and their host communities. In our interagency effort to help our African partners fight Boko Haram, we're also working closely with our international partners, including the UK, France, and the European Union, as well as the African Union. So what's the way forward? The way forward, let me just say, is not going to be easy. We know that. We've been going forward for a long, long time. There are no overnight solutions. The challenges of defeating Boko Haram is going to require long-term dedication to this effort. All of us here in this room have a role to play, and we need your help. We need members of Congress, and we have that, we know, through Congresswoman Bass, but many others. It's bipartisan. We need members of Congress from both sides of the aisle and both chambers to organize events like this one. And I want to thank you, Congresswoman Bass, for hosting this amazing group of people. And we need hearings to get a better understanding of the problem. And we've had those hearings as well, and I want those to continue. We need academics. Thank you, Ambassador Brigady, for being in the room. We need academics to help us understand the underlying conditions that led to Boko Haram. We need think tanks to identify creative solutions. We need the business community to help bring investments in the region and to create jobs and spur greater economic development in the affected areas. We need our ambassadors. We need our African ambassadors based here in Washington to advocate for more resources in the fight against Boko Haram and greater cooperation among the Lake Chad Basin countries. You need to report back to your governments that there is an intense interest here in Washington in helping them to find a solution to this incredible problem. We need the civil society community to push for improved governance and human rights in the region. We need journalists to report on the depravities of Boko Haram as well as progress the Nigerians and other governments of the region are making on human rights. And we'll need continued resources from our governments. It's also important to note that Africa's people are central in this fight. I ask every day, do African lives matter? Yes. There's rarely a protest when we hear that Africans have been killed on the continent of Africa. There's rarely a protest every single day when we hear that Boko Haram is killing people. We get protests in front of the State Department all the time, protesting all kinds of human rights violations, protests people being killed on the continent by terrorists. We need to hear the voices of the people. Ordinary men and women in Africa, the United States and abroad, need to raise their voices and send an unmistakable message that Boko Haram's violence is intolerable and is unacceptable. The outcry in Nigeria and internationally over the killings of the Chibok schoolgirls was impressive, but it was slow. We waited to hear what people would say. Those protests, once they started, helped greatly to raise awareness of Boko Haram's brutality. But they were only a start. We must say something. We must stand up and say that we can no longer accept these monstrosities. Boko Haram does not represent the views of the Muslim populations in Africa, and they do not represent the voices of Africa. And it's important that we all stand up and say, African lives matter. Those are the tasks that confront both the region and those of us who are here must help in addressing these. This will be a long fight that requires perseverance. It's going to require strong resources. We all know the stakes are high. We know the stakes, what the stakes are. Last week's attack in Dolori was a clear reminder. But now is the time. Now is the time for us to work together with our African partners to redouble our efforts to defeat Boko Haram and create the bright future. And it's a bright future that all of the people of Africa deserve. But I would say in this case, particularly a bright future for the people of northern Nigeria and the Lake Chad Basin. Thank you very much.
Let's have another round of applause for our Assistant Secretary. I have to say I so appreciate her saying African lives matter because, you know, as our year ended, and, you know, at the end of every year, they sum up the most significant events of the year, and they go through the top 10 news stories. And we know that ISIS, it was obviously a major news story, and the number of people that have been killed by ISIS. But when you look at the number of people that have been killed by Boko Haram, it's more than the number of lives lost to ISIS. And so I think part of our job here is raising the consciousness in the U.S. that just because something is happening on the continent, that doesn't mean that it does not have international significance. So I really appreciated that. I mentioned before we started about my colleague, Frederica Wilson, and I mentioned that she has been leading the effort on the Hill, a crusade around the Chibok girls. And ever since they were kidnapped, she will not let anyone in the House of Representatives forget the Chibok girls. I am proud to say that Frederica Wilson and I started Congress the same. We've been here now for 6 years. And this is a woman that in her hometown is absolutely a hero. She's worried about the Chibok girls, but I will tell you that in her state of Florida, I don't know how many black boys she has saved with her crusade there. And I know that it's over 5,000 in terms of the mentor program that she has started there. So join me, round of applause for Frederica Wilson.
Good morning. Good morning. This is not a good morning for me at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, coming in from the warmest place on the continent, Miami. So Karen is a nurse, so she's been watching me with this cold I've had for a while, and I'm very honored to be here today, and I'm very thankful and grateful to her for calling all of you together for this important forum. I can't tell you the tears I've cried for these girls, and I pray for them every morning before I pray for myself, because they're always a heartbeat just away from me. So many of them have traveled to the United States, and they come to see me. And last week, I just sent a group of computers over to Virginia for them. These are girls who escaped from Boko Haram. I want to tell you that I was a school principal, and when I began to hear that some terrorists went into a school in Nigeria and kidnapped little girls who were there trying to study, I was stunned that this would happen. And it was so quiet because it had already happened. And I couldn't understand it. So I began a crusade in the House of Representatives, going to the floor every day, speaking about it. So the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee called me up and he said, Mrs. Wilson, would you like to go to Nigeria? I said, any day, let me go. Please, I need to go. So within days, I was on a flight with two other colleagues flying to Nigeria. When I got to Nigeria, I was able to meet the parents of the little girls who had been kidnapped. I was able to meet some of the young women who had escaped from Boko Haram, the Chibok girls who jumped off the truck and ran. And I was able to listen to some of the horrific stories that they told me that happened to them in order to get away. And if you're faint of heart, you won't be able to listen to me, but because I tell it just like it is. One little girl told me that they were all on the truck, and the one who said, you know, they're going to kill us. They're going to kill us or they're going to rape us. So we have a decision. We can either stay on this truck or we can jump. So that truck of girls jumped off the truck, and one of them broke her leg. And when she broke her leg, she was the one who said jump. They all grabbed her and they ran and they ran and they ran. And then as they were running, one fell down. And one of the Boko Haram terrorists caught her, and he threw her on the ground attempting to rape her. And she said, please don't rape me. I'm on my period. And he took his hand and rammed it into her body and recoiled with blood from her period. And then he turned around and she ran and ran and ran and ran until she caught up with the other girls. It was horrendous. We met another young girl who had been slashed with the machete by Boko Haram. And the one that I will always remember was a little girl who they went into her village and they were killing all of the men. They killed her father first, and the mother ran into the bushes. So there she was, left with the father and the brother. So they killed the brother, they killed the father, and then they said, well, let the kids go, one of the terrorists said, and they said no, because he's going to go up to be a pastor, just like his father, so let's kill him too. And so they decapitated him while this little girl watched. And then they took her and sandwiched her between the father who they shot, the brother who they decapitated, and tied them up. And there she was, tied between these two dead relatives for days before someone can find her. She was traumatized beyond belief. but she is here in the United States trying to go to school and receiving therapy. After that situation, we tried to see the president. We could not see him. He said he was out of town, but we saw his motorcade going down the street. After all of these meetings, and then the president had a summit, and he brought the African presidents here. So I had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Goodluck Jonathan, to ask him. I said, why are you here? You should not be here. You should be in Nigeria trying to find these girls. This is where you should be. And he was saying, yes, you need to go and talk to my security people. So when he went to speak at his event, I was there protesting with the teachers from Washington, D.C. And then I passed resolutions in the House, speaking on the House floor, and I said, what does it take? Karen and I had all kind of press conferences. We had all kinds of meetings. I said, what does it take to get the attention of this Congress? So while I was in Nigeria, I met the Bring Back Our Girls movement, and every day they have a sit-out in front of the hotel. And it was the hotel where we were staying. And they said, Mrs. Wilson, would you please bring back our girls to the United States, keep it alive on Twitter, and that will help. So we began to tweet every day. And aside from tweeting, I'm going to pass these out to you. You know what this says? It says, remember, tomorrow is Wear Red Wednesday. Bring back our girls. Join Rep. Wilson. So we expect you to tweet, and every Wednesday, I want every one of you, some of you already have on red today. I'm wearing red today just to remind you, but I want you to tweet, and wear red. I'm going to also circulate this picture. This is a picture of all of the women of Congress, every single one of them, Republicans and Democrats, wearing red, holding up a sign that says, bring back our girls. And I'm going to circulate it, and I'm going to be here all day. So at the end, I'm not leaving. I'm going to hear everything you have to say, because I want to know what's happening. I know some things that I've read, but I want to know. And I want you to see this picture. This is a picture that I want to show to you. This is a picture of a young child. This is the last atrocities. This is what I will show on the floor tomorrow to help me pass the bill that I have languishing in the Foreign Affairs Committee that has already been passed by the Republican Senator, Representative Senator Collins. But I need my bill passed in the House. So call your legislators, call your House members and say, help Congresswoman Wilson and Congresswoman Bass pass the bill on helping the Shabbat girls. And this is what they're doing now. They are burning children alive. So we've got to keep this on the front page. This is not just about bringing back our girls. This is a call to action for Nigeria. This is a call to action for Africa. This is a call to action about Boko Haram, the deadliest terrorist group in the world that has been proven by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and still they are allowed to run free and kill and ravish and murder so many Nigerians. They're in Cameroon and in Niger danger, so we've got to keep this on the forefront. Thank you, Congresswoman Bass. Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee. And thank you, Congresswoman Meeks, who's sponsoring this forum today. And don't forget, wear red tomorrow and every single solitary day. Tweet hashtag bring back our girls. Thank you.
Needless to say, we all know in Congress, don't mess with Frederica Wilson. She sort of said this, but I just want to emphasize that when she went to Nigeria, she helped bring the girls back. I mean, so the ones that are here in Virginia are here really because of her leadership. She made sure they were here, and she checks on them and makes sure that they have the counseling and the other services that they need. So we now are going to go into our panel, and you know, as we do the breakfasts, we always allow plenty of time for Q&A. So we're going to have our panelists come up now, and I would like to introduce our moderator, Nii Akwete, who is a very respected and well-known Africanist. I often watch Nii on TV commenting, especially on Al Jazeera, which I guess we're only going to have for a few more weeks. But he is the executive director of the African Immigrants Caucus. And so let me welcome Nii, and Nii will introduce and invite up our panelists.
Good morning. Because we are already behind time, let me just say a big thank you to Ms. Bass. Every chance I get, I remind her that there is a great deal of goodwill in the African community here for her and on the continent for her. And it's simple because it's we feel the things that she does for the continent. We know she's a big champion for Africa. So thank you again, Ms. Bass. I think that everybody has a copy of the program, and if you turn on the back, you will see that I'm joined here by my three colleagues, Ambassador Gurieti, Dr. Raymond Gilpin, and Mr. Mboden. I'm not going to read their bios. I'm just going to welcome them here and ask the ambassador to begin with his 5-minute remark.
Mr. Akwete, thank you very much. And let me also thank Congresswoman Bass for extraordinary leadership, not only on Boko Haram, but on Africa issues broadly. And thank also Congresswoman Wilson as a native Floridian. I'm very grateful for your leadership and for your passion, excellencies. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is fair to say that with the extraordinary policy speech that Ambassador Thomas Greenfield just delivered, as well as the impassioned plea that Congresswoman Wilson just delivered, that everything that needs to be said has been said. Certainly in terms of the quality of the analysis and the urgent desire or call for action. So seeing, and it's wonderful to see so many people here this morning, so what I'm going to do is take literally just a minute, maybe two, to try to amplify a couple of other things from my perspective, both from as the recent past ambassador to the African Union, as well as someone who's worked on African refugee issues closely on the continent, to try to highlight a couple of things in addition to what the Secretary and the Congresswoman just said. So if there is a silver lining on the Boko Haram challenge, I think it is this. 10 years ago, more or less, when the United States tried to have conversations with our African partners about the importance of terrorism and counterterrorism, the basic response from most of them was, thank you for your interest, but we have other issues that we are much more concerned about, whether it be wildlife poaching or creation of jobs and whatnot. And I think it's fair to say that there simply was not a similar level of urgency on the part of our African colleagues as there was on the part of the United States, certainly it's just after 9/11 with regard to the issue of terrorism. They're certainly sympathetic, but not with the same level of urgency. That changed post-Westgate in Nairobi, post Al-Shabaab attacks in Ghana in 2010 during the World Cup matches, and then also clearly post rise of Boko Haram. And since then, we have seen the issue of terrorism and counterterrorism develop to the very top of the security agenda of the continent, as witnessed by not only the extraordinary meeting of heads of summit in Nairobi, summit of heads of state in Nairobi in 2013, to articulate a strategy such as it is for counterterrorism on the part of the African Union, to most recently at the last AU summit on January 29th, a statement by heads of state of the Peace and Security Council about the importance of counterterrorism and countering Boko Haram in particular. And this is crucially important because it then creates the political space for Africans to engage with each other as well as to engage with partner countries like the United States to figure out what more can be done to strengthen their counterterrorism approach. And this is of particular importance with regard to the multinational joint task force that has been set up in N'Djamena that has done some important work in countering Boko Haram, but as the Assistant Secretary said, not only is there much more to do, but this is clearly a long-term fight that will require long-term resources, long-term commitment. And let me also just say briefly, in addition to the broader counterterrorism issue, there is clearly a massive humanitarian component that accompanies it. There are, depending on the numbers, at least 200,000, as many as 220,000 Nigerians that have become refugees, over 2 million internally displaced in Nigeria alone, as a direct result of the fighting of Boko Haram. Now, here's the kicker. The UN ranks humanitarian emergencies on levels from 1, 2, and 3, with level 3 being the most serious humanitarian emergency in the world. Currently, the international humanitarian system is dealing with 4 level 3 humanitarian emergencies, something that has never happened in the history of the humanitarian system. And Nigeria is not one of them. They are South Sudan, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. Now, the reason that is significant is that in order to continue to have the humanitarian response that is necessary to deal with these refugee crises, the level of advocacy that will need to be placed on all humanitarian partners is extraordinary because the competition, such as it is for other humanitarian emergencies, has never been higher in the history of the world. And thus, it is extremely important for the same kind of passion that Congresswoman Wilson expressed for the Chibok girls to apply to the totality of the problem set in terms of humanitarian response, in terms of counterterrorism response, and obviously in terms of the political response as well. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Bass, and your staff for